Thank you, everybody. My name is Lynn Coates, and I'm an alcoholic. And if I still didn't have, it's one of those defects I guess God finds useful because it hasn't totally been removed, but my laziness or my maximum result for minimal effort, or it's just too much trouble. I lost the right to have that name 15 years ago. The kids were little at the time. That was my excuse, and now it's just too darn much trouble. But that last name has gotten me into a lot of trouble. Those Coates boys, I mean, they weren't from Coates either, but yeah, I met them all when I was 13 years old and wanted so badly to be 18 or 19, and they were all 5 to 9 years older than me. And I tried my best not to look like a little puppy when I followed them around and tried to act older than I was, but they had everything I wanted. So anyway, that's sometime later on. I am a member of the Principals Group of Raleigh. We meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. In about 50 minutes, we'll be doing pretty much what I'm doing here. We are a closed discussion meeting or a big book study meeting, topic, literature, traditions, AA history meeting on Tuesday nights. And on Thursday nights at 8, we have an open speaker meeting. And if there's a fifth Thursday night of the month, we will have a workshop from 8 to 9:30. We provide babysitting. There seems to be, they come and they go, but there never seems to be really a lack of parents who we don't want to let them use the kids as an excuse not to get to an AA meeting. And some of our younger ladies are growing up in AA and have gotten married and had children. And they come and they bring their precious little babies to us. And if you've got certain requirements, sometimes they don't look really comfortable with who's walking off. But there's 2 home group members, a man and a woman, and we will go watch and play with your children so you can get a meeting in. And that, thank God, is the kind of AA that I was introduced to. I mean, I walked out of 117 days for a 90 days program from Louisiana, and had a house in Raleigh I couldn't pay the mortgage on, had to turn the lights off while I was gone, had to turn the water off while I was gone. My mom had arranged with the bank to put some sort of delay on my car payments on my car for 3 months. Somebody called Human Resources from the company I used to work for kept calling me in the cabin at treatment and identified themselves as Human Resources, and I thought they were a spy or somebody out to get me, so I refused to disclose any information to them. So the disability that I was entitled to at work didn't come through. It was a mess. It was an absolute mess. I went to treatment because they finally Coward here wasn't going to walk up to anybody and say I need help. Didn't know how to do that. But I worked in a pharmacy, and I knew I needed to stop drinking. I couldn't. I had plan after plan after plan, and I kept buying a bottle or stealing a little something from work. And I was going to drink this much the first night, and then half as much the second night, and then half as much the third night. And I knew, I could see it coming. My life was going to implode on me. It was just, I knew I was going out with a whimper. And I thought maybe I really didn't want to die after all. Maybe. And I did that 6 or 7 times over the last 2 years of my drinking. I don't remember it being the last 2 years of my drinking, but I've been able to put together enough of the pieces with the help of some people who were around that I now know that blur of grayness was late 99 to early 2002. Beats me. Must have been one log brownout. But I finally got confronted at work. I had taken a week off just so I could sober up in the privacy of my home. I lived in a home where it had been months since I'd gotten an invitation anywhere. I was a social, as best of butterfly as I could be as a teenager. There wasn't a bartender in town who didn't know my name. I had lots of friends. I, didn't go to school because you didn't have to. I could show up sometimes, maybe remember when the tests were and maybe take them, maybe not. Barely got out of high school. But, I would, as a teenager, I was so afraid and so uncomfortable to be alone because of things I believed about myself. And if I had to spend a night at home, particularly a Friday or Saturday night, by myself, that meant all kinds of horrible things about my value and my worth as a human being. And I would get dressed and I would leave our home and I would start walking because I could not be by myself. And when I was 16 when I got my first fake ID, so there was a liquor store, a quarter of a mile down the road, and I knew if I had a little booze, and if I looked cute, this was the 70s, there were all kinds of long-haired guys in vans, and total strangers didn't even scare me. I mean, it's amazing. But at the end of my drinking, I think that it was, what was that, March? So sometime around Christmas, my cute, wonderful, well-manicured next-door neighbor, who seemed to understand intuitively how to mother her children, and who had a husband, and who just seemed to be such a vital, active, friendly woman who always smiled and waved, came over, brought me food. When she moved in, I was already living there. I was supposed to be bringing her food, but she hadn't met me yet. She made me sick. She scared me. I mean, she was just everything I knew I wasn't, and she had invited all the ladies in the neighborhood to some sort of get-together, and they were religious church folk, and they didn't drink. And at first I was so excited to get an invitation. This was Christmas of 2001, and it said RSVP, and I was raised right, at least, mostly right, and I knew what that meant, and I was excited because I was going to go. And then I started thinking through the mechanics of the next door neighbor's house without having the drink that I wanted. I thought, well, I could drive. No, I can't drive over there, because if I drive, it would be in the trunk, but that would be silly. And really, how many excuses could I make to leave her house, to go home, to suck it down real fast to get over there? And it just got horribly, horribly complicated. I thought, well, okay, so I'm not going, but at least, I got enough dignity to RSVP. Next thing I know, I am standing there in my bathrobe, because all I ever wore at home was my bathrobe, and I'm looking through the sliding windows of the side of the house, and I can see the ladies, these well-dressed women, getting out of their cars, bearing gifts, and they're walking up to the front door, and they're ringing the doorbell, and there's crying and of excitement and exclamations and all this chatter that women make. And I'm standing there, and I'm having that moment like Bill Wilson talks about. How do they do that? It's next door. It couldn't be more than 2 hours, and it was an overwhelmingly complicated thing to accomplish. My own mother had stopped leaving me messages on the answering machine. I got up, I went to work. It was me and the all-night news cycle, CNN or Fox News, whatever. It got to where 10 after the hour, 20 after the hour. I mean, I knew exactly when Wolf Blitzer was coming on. I knew exactly when, it was horrible. And I did not know, I was not willing, whatever that baffling stuff is. The only thing I could think of to do was to just hit my knees and start praying. Never not believed that there was some sort of higher power. I just made a decision. I mean, my head is full of stuff I'd made decisions on as a kid and as an adolescent and as a teenager that absolutely were not true. But, I don't know about you, but if you're wondering about something and if you can figure out some sort of answer that sounds good, and if it makes enough sense, it must be true. Why ask anybody? Why run it by your parents? Really? I don't know if it's because I didn't want to admit I didn't know something, or if I was just so satisfied with my ability to create answers and convince myself they were true. But I had, I forgot where I was when I went on that. Anyway, I'll move on. So I got confronted at work of praying. I had been praying. I think I prayed 3 or 4 nights, and I had to walk myself through this, this conscious awareness of a prayer, because at first it was, God help me, get me out of this, I'll do anything. Oh really? Do you know what anything's going to involve? And by the end I was fairly comfortable that it was going to be bad, it was going to be scary, it was going to be embarrassing, people were going to find out. I really was a failure. It was, all this stuff that I tried to use to bolster myself and keep me alive and keep me functioning in society was not working after all. And then I was just tired of trying to do it. I was tired of people looking at me the way they looked at me. I was tired of being so isolated and not having anybody that I was comfortable calling. I was done. I was just done. And I remember thinking, I didn't know anything. I didn't know AA. I didn't know treatment centers, but I remember thinking there was probably going to be some jail time or prison time. There would definitely be charges. I was a thief. It was going to tear my children up. Because when I started drinking again, they were old enough to be gone from the house a lot of the time. My daughter had a license, and my son had decided to go live with his father. But anything was better than the alternative. And about 3 or 4 days later, I was going off on vacation, and I knew what kind of liquor I was going to buy, and I was going to get some hard cider. And I was getting a little of the, anti-withdrawal type medicines that some people actually get a doctor to write them a prescription for. And I was trying, and I kept going back because I always needed more. It wasn't quite right. And I finally just got confronted at work. And I ran. There were voices. I remember voices yelling at me, "You come back here." And I drove back from Henderson to Raleigh. And years before, during one of our continuing education seminars, this man had been allowed to give, he told me later, it was like a 5-minute presentation. And he said, I have this organization, we're approved through the legislature for people with alcohol and drug problems. If you ever need me, this is how you can get in touch with me. This is the name of the organization. And that had been at least 5 years prior to that. And I'm driving back from Henderson to Raleigh, and I'm screaming and I'm crying, and I'm running off the road, and the bottle under the seat is empty. There's nothing in the glove compartment. And I get home, and the acronym for his organization comes into my head. And I emailed him, and it was about 10:30 or 11 o'clock on a Thursday night. I don't remember anymore. Anyway, for the next 2 or 3 days, that man called me over the phone, and he gave me instructions. Have you eaten anything yet? When was the last time you took your blood pressure? And just questions. And then finally he got me through Sunday evening. He got me to call my parents. He got me to ask my parents to come over. They took me back to their house with a little bag of overnight clothes. They called my children in, told my children I was going away for a 7-day evaluation. And I hope I always remember the look on my children's face. It was just as I said that, I could remember that blank, paralyzed, deer in the headlight look. They said they always knew something was wrong. They figured I was just depressed. And I was off to his office on Tuesday, and he said I had to go away for 90 days, and we went away. And 2.5, 3 years later, I finally moved back to Raleigh. My earliest memories are of knowing things like, I told you I knew things, because you don't ask for some reason. You think a kid would trust her parents, particularly parents who never gave her any reason not to trust her. But they only love me because they have to love me. They wish they had another child, but they're going to be nice because they're good people, and they're going to hug me and love me instead. I have asked my mother as a process of being a grown-up in Alcoholics Anonymous and having a new and better relationship with her, what was it like being a 16-year-old in a small Southern Baptist town in 1961, finding out that you're pregnant? And she shared some of that with me, and it's not what it is today. They lived with their parents the first couple of years. And I said, I always thought that you only loved me because you had to, that you always wish you'd had another child, that, I've spent most of my life with this conclusion that had no basis, that, you just never held me or loved me enough or any of that stuff enough. And she would get uncomfortable, and she would look guilty, and she would say, well, I was really young, and well, I don't know that I knew how to mother. And we did that once, and I figured out how to stop her about halfway through it, because my goal was not to make my mother feel guilty and like a lowlife and uncomfortable just because I wanted some validation of how crazy my thinking was as a young girl. So that's, I'm not going to make myself feel good at another person's expense. So that's the last we talked about, and we've just worked on being two grown women who love each other and just happen to be related by blood. I had a younger brother, and I was convinced when he was born that he was the child they really wanted. Now, my brother was 3 years younger than me. He bled out in a hotel room in September of 2005 as a result of being an alcoholic. He had gone to treatment as a 16 or 17-year-old because other substances were his problem, and he was not. And he started some NA meetings and did all this and went back to school and got his GED and lived with my father and got married and had kids and got his college degree and had clients and needed to take them out to lunch for martinis. And he wasn't an alcoholic, so that wasn't a problem, right? That was the early 90s. And he's bleeding to death in a hotel room, and he called his wife. They were separated, and she came over to the hotel. He said, "I'm sick, my stomach's upset. If you could just bring me a V8 juice and something else, I think it will settle my stomach." And she walked into the hotel room, and she just remembers hearing the squish, squish as she walked across the carpet because there was that much blood on the carpet. That is what this illness can do, untreated alcoholism. And she said she has this vivid memory of seeing the vodka bottle peeking out from underneath the nightstand, and how, as she finally, because he couldn't get off the bed, as she finally pushed the door open and came in and heard the squish squish, she sees him lying on the bed, and he's trying so hard to roll off the bed and push that bottle underneath the nightstand. When I was first getting sober, and he was just drinking the occasional martini because he has to take the clients out to lunch, he and I could have some decent conversations, and he could spit the big book to me inside and out. He could spit it out to me. And we compared our childhood, and what we were both convinced of was that our parents loved the other one best. We both could match up the same unvalidated, selfish, neurotic, needy, alcoholic thinking in each other as it manifested in my brother and me. That was kind of cute. We enjoyed those conversations. That was while we could talk to each other. So I grew up in this family, and I'm feeling isolated, and I'm feeling alone. And my only memory of alcohol is when they finally graduated from college and we moved down to North Carolina. We moved into this tiny little house in this brand new tract suburb, and we had arrived. We were told, we have arrived. All the hard work has paid off. And oh shoot. And I would bring my dad beers as he worked on the house. And I remember, because he was finishing the basement, and I remember cracking those beers for him and the way it sounded, and thinking, this stinks. And noticing that it relaxed my dad, and after the second beer I brought him, he would stand up on the ladder and be doing whatever it was he was doing at the wiring, and he and I would talk. And it was wonderful. So they get divorced, and I'm 13, and I'm in a high school with those Coates boys, and those girls that are 17 and 18, and they wear hip huggers, and their hair is long and straight, and they know how to put that blue eyeshadow on just right. And I get invited to a party, and my memories of that are, I needed to figure out who I had to be in order to blend in with them. I needed to figure out what I had to wear, how to get that blue eyeshadow on, what kind of lie I needed to tell to my mom. And I got there, and this guy I'd been eyeballing, he was a senior, I was a freshman, 9th grade. He was playing chess. It was a great big carpet rug chessboard with big plastic pieces about that big. And so I lied and told him I knew how to play chess, and challenged him to a chess game. And this was about half a beer in. And I don't remember a whole lot, but I remember belonging. I remember having the courage to talk to him. I remember feeling the same as everybody in that room. And I remember believing that maybe it was possible that there was a place for me. And I don't think I had ever experienced that sense of peace and comfort prior to that night. And that was half a beer in. Well, at least, I don't know, that was my last memory. And I had a blackout. I think the majority of my drinking on and off for the next 20 years was characterized by blackouts. But it was so normal for me, I didn't think anything about huge chunks of evenings. I thought it was exciting to wake up in a whole nother city. I thought it was fun to look at the people that I'm lying on the floor with, you know? I mean, if everybody was as brave as I was, every teenager in the world would be living like I was living. I was bold, I was big, I was brave. I was 6 foot tall and bulletproof. I saw High Plains Drifter and the Outlaw Josie Wells, for any of you who are old enough to remember the old spaghetti Clint Eastwood weapons, and I wanted to be Clint Eastwood. I mean, he needed no one. Nobody bothered him. He did what he wanted. He brought some sort of twisted justice to everybody, and then he left. I mean, isn't that what life is supposed to be? I mean, interacting with people was just way too hard and complicated and awkward. I might need somebody. They might need me, and if they need me, I'm going to have to be responsible for them, and being responsible for people requires work. You know, all kinds of things. I took piano lessons, I gave up because it required too much work. I took dance lessons, I quit because it took too much work. I tried to honestly study for my tests, I gave up, it took too much work. I just figured out who I needed to sit behind in class. I make it to college, some last-minute Hail Marys at school, and I go to a dry county. I remember, one, it was the only college that accepted me, and finding out that it was a dry county, and not knowing this is what it was, but knew I would do really well in college in a dry county. That somehow, because when I drank, nothing much got accomplished. And I had goofed off. I was 17, I was going off to discover the world, and it was time to stop that nonsense. Well, I lasted 3 weeks because Silva, the next town over, was only 20 minutes away, and I still have the scar on my skull and my head from the wrecks we got into trying to go back and forth to get the booze and come back to campus. We wrecked all the time. Got back to Raleigh. Met up with my teenage drinking buddy that I met when I was 13. He had just gotten kicked out of the Navy for getting into trouble. He got one of those honorable, dishonorable, or they call dishonorable, honorable discharges. And we got pregnant, we got married. And I had just dropped out of college by that time because I had blacked out and broken my neck in a drunk driving accident. The only thing I remember about that is the fireman picking me up and carrying me up the hill and me going, my neck hurts, be careful. We got married, we had kids, I went back to school. I knew that if I drank, I would get nowhere at all. It's that guy in the big book. You know, I knew that I needed to stop. I had a goal to attain, and for a long time I could do that. I mean, I drank for 6 years. I got into trouble. I threw up blood. I ended up in all kinds of places I had no business ending up, and the hardest work I did was trying to make sure that my standards dropped fast enough so that I didn't run screaming from some cabin or some trailer or some tenement somewhere when I woke up and found out where I'd ended up this time. You know, it's okay. It's not that bad. It's not as bad as. You know, find somebody that you can identify as having some sort of standards. You know, and as long as I could keep that game up, I didn't lose my mind. There were times, however, when I tried to stop as a teenager and it wasn't successful. I remember being in bed and shaking a lot and then saying, oh, to heck with this, and getting up and, I don't know, getting dressed, walking to the ABC store. Who knows what I did? I don't remember. But, you know, nothing else in my life happened or moved when I was drinking. So I go back to school. My husband gets a job. We have 2 children. 10, 13 years go by. I'm angry. I'm angry. I'm going out once or twice a year, pulling a good one. Discovered the first or second time I did that the next 2 days were going to be shot. So if there was a concert I wanted to go to, I needed to take the next day off, make sure my mother was free and available to spend some time with the kids because, you know, she never got to see them enough. Really, it was so I could be in bed with the trash can by the bed until I recuperated. And my husband, the drinker, the one I was pointing my finger at the whole time we were married, was looking at me with disgust. I was the good one, right? Well, after 13 years, circumstances arranged. He came home drunk one night. It got kind of bad, solely because he was drunk. I called the police. He was out. And at which point in time, I decided, for the benefit of my children, because drinking had scarred them their daddy's drinking had scarred them so badly, that I needed to bring alcohol back into the house so that I could show them how non-problem drinkers drank. So what ended up happening was my daughter had found God through some neighbors, and she had started going to church. And I told myself that I started going to church because it was not acceptable for my children to be introduced to God by anybody other than their parent. I would look bad. And that's what I said for years. But I really think part of it underneath was me wanting God back in my life. I mean, I remember sitting in church and being mad at the preacher for telling me how I had to believe. It seemed like an awful lot of work, too. There were classes you had to take and things you had to memorize, and it just seemed to be a whole lot of rigmarole. This was my view of it as a child. I remember sitting in church doing my defiant best not to hear a thing whoever was at the pulpit had to say, intentionally drowning them out, staring through the beautiful windows, just talking to whatever was there in here. And I think what I was doing at the time was things like, I want to do this, or I did that. It's not so bad, was it? That was okay, wasn't it? You know, I don't like the way he's talking about you. That's okay, isn't it? You know, just having these negotiating conversations with whatever Spirit of God was within me. And I knew, violated every single rule. I mean, the 4th grade, they had me in one of those classes, and I knew I was in big trouble. I had broken every single one of those rules already. Even the murder part, because I knew the thoughts that I was having about people. And I knew the words that were coming out of my mouth about my brother when I spoke to my parents. And I figured that God just wouldn't have anything to do with me because God had judged me, and I could just escape all that, live as good as I wanted to here, and then whatever came after, whatever, didn't matter anyway, right? What mattered was, where's that next drink? Where's the party? Where's the after party? Where's the party after the after party? And so when my daughter went back to church, I followed shortly after. And I met a group of women who were very spiritual, very wonderful women. And we would meet and we would have dinners together, and they would have wine at these dinners, and I would be finishing up my 2nd glass, staring at every single one of them who still had their 1st glass, thinking, for God's sake, would one of you please just finish your drink and pour yourself a 2nd one so I can have a 3rd one? You know, I couldn't have had a problem with alcohol because I would only drink 3 glasses around them. You know, we went to restaurants, and I had discovered early on that one drink made me mad, so I just didn't drink. I couldn't have had a problem with alcohol. I was not drinking, but I was so angry. I was just furious. I hated myself. I hated everybody. Nobody was doing anything good enough. And then I brought booze back into the house, and within a few months, my kids are asleep, and instead of drinking that one drink to show them that one bottle can last, I'm drinking the entire bottle, leaving them alone in the house asleep, to drive up to the store to try to buy, if the liquor store was closed or whatever, the wine racks, the whatever. You know, it didn't matter, but whatever it was I was drinking, to buy the same thing, to bring it back home, to drink it down to where it was when I started the evening, and then drink what that one glass would have been. And I was leaving my kids at home alone to do that. And I was stealing from work. And eventually that gave way and I got caught. I mean, I couldn't function. I could barely shower to get to work. And I got confronted. And I ran home. And I went away to treatment for 4 months. And it was all very, very strange, because it was like I was landed among people who were speaking English, but they had this vocabulary that made no sense. And so I did what they asked me to do, and it just took me a little bit longer to do it. I was feeling very, very sorry for myself, and I was really stuck and angry. And I think one of the best things they did was just let me walk around by myself for 2 weeks and not do anything except take a look at what that stuff was that was inside of me. And I finally got permission to leave, and I told a lady my 5th step, and I told her everything that was the worst I could think of at the time, because I figured it didn't matter, I was never going to see her again. And I asked a lot of questions, because what they were doing in small group had a lot of this AA stuff here, but they weren't AA, and I didn't understand what the difference was. So I peppered them with questions. How can you not be AA? And they finally just gave up in exasperation. I think this is my memory of, you know, the eye rolls and the, just go to AA as soon as you get out. Just go to AA, find a sponsor, find a home group, just go to AA, experience it, and what I heard them say, and you will learn the difference. And that's what I did, and I did. I mean, I came into AA with a little bit of some stuff and a little bit of security for my future from some savings I've done. with a clean, my last DWI had been almost maybe 20 years prior. I mean, I looked pretty good on paper, on the balance sheets. The first year of my sobriety, I lost everything. I mean, the house went, the car, I kept the car. The house went, the retirement went, the clean criminal background check went. I got a phone call one day that said, they're going to come and arrest you, and this is what you're going to do. These are the plans I've made for you. This is God doing for me what I cannot do myself. He said, you need to find that lawyer of yours who was working for you for nothing. He said, you need to drive up to Vance County. You're going to be cuffed, you're going to be fingerprinted, and you're going to have to talk. They will bring you up before the judge. You'll probably, and by this time I wasn't listening. And one of many times that I got off the phone and curled up, in a fetal position on my bed and rocked myself, unable to move. But I had people who had my back, and I followed instructions. And I did that with my sponsor too. It's almost like I felt like this, I was an empty shell of a woman. I remember the last Christmas before I got sober, walking through department stores, having no idea who these kids were, these adolescents were, what they liked to do, what their interests were. And I remember just buying stuff that I hoped was age appropriate, and I had no idea if it was anything my kids were interested in. I have this cloudy memory of sitting on the sofa, watching them open these presents and being so grateful that they were too polite to say, Mom, what the, Because, and looking at it and thinking, I have somewhere lost the ability to feel the love. If I can't feel love for my children, I am an empty, hollow shell of a person. That's like an animal. I can throw something in the microwave most of the time and make sure maybe they've got something to eat for dinner, but I'm not raising children. I was this animal. And so my first year sober was very eventful. But I got through it all. My sponsor drove up my return to work interview when I was 9 months sober, which really turned out to be loss prevention, and my boss and my ex-boss and my boss's boss, and them asking me questions about the last 2 years that I really had no memory of. Signing papers, I don't know. I remember walking up and seeing the secretary look at me, and her face for a moment lighting up with pleasure. Lynn, where'd you go? Okay, they're in there waiting for you. The betrayal and the anger on their face. I had my first awareness of a spiritual experience when I got out of my car, because that return to work interview, I thought they were going to slap me on the wrist, make me sign some papers, agree to pay them back X amount per month, a very comfortable amount that I could afford, because I was only making $6.75 an hour at the time, 30 hours a week. And then they would allow me back on some sort of probationary basis. And no, they just took all the paperwork and turned it into the county. But I walked and I got back into the car. My sponsor sat in the car and did Sudoku or something for 3.5 hours, because she had promised me that I didn't have to do anything alone anymore unless I chose to. And I told her how I had walked in there so full of fear and so angry at the injustices that they were getting ready to dish out at me. And I walked out of there realizing that here were people who had respected and maybe even liked me, and I had betrayed them to the point that they were angry at me. And that all they wanted was their money back, and that it was going to take me a really, really, really long time to pay it back, but I was willing to do it. And she looked at me and she said, it sounds like you've had a spiritual awakening experience. I don't know which word she used. And I said, what does that mean? And she gave me the page in the book where Carl Jung's talking to Roland Hazard and said, read it. Read it. The ideas, the things that were once the guiding forces of my life are displaced. I am rearranged, and a new set of ideas and beliefs replace those. And that's what I'd experienced at that moment. I landed in Rocky Mount, North Carolina from Louisiana treatment because it was the only place I could find that was within decent driving distance of my home where my children were, and that fit the requirements of one of the many higher powers I was responsible for. And I drove, and I took the steps, and I worked them, and I wrestled with them, and I was as honest as I think I could be. I made some really unspiritual decisions my first couple of years sober. They all came home to roost a couple of years later. I got a very, very humbling look at my ability to lie to myself at 3 years sober. And that was right. That was a few months after my brother died, and a cousin died, And I came to work for the same profession that I had left 3 years before, and I was placed in a store with two people who were in recovery, although not this same fellowship, and we laughed and we comforted, and they understood when I got wiggy, and I understood when they got wiggy, and we helped each other out, and one of them died. And I found the truth in the belief that if God's not already in your life, if that safety net's not already there, if there's not a big enough power that I am already resting in, when the crap hits the fan, if it's not already there, it's too late to try to put something in place at the last minute. And I screamed and I yelled and I cried and I punched pillows and I was angry at God and I felt sorry for myself. And at the same time, I'm doing all this in private because, you know, I'm sponsoring women by this time. Talking to my sponsor about it, but, you know, going to meetings and talking in a general way about how I stayed sober that day, and all this stuff is going on inside of me. And I really had to come to find God. I had to find a higher power. I had to discover who it was that I believed in. And I realized that I could stay sober through anything. I mean, life has kept coming. Things have kept happening. I still get angry when I make mistakes, but I also laugh at myself now when I make mistakes, and I'm willing to do better. But I worked those steps as hard and as fast as I could when I first got sober. I was sponsoring women at 5 months. She said, well, you've done the 12th step, you've had a spiritual awakening of some sort, practice these principles in all your affairs, go fishing. And I was in the local clubhouse, and there was a woman who'd been sober for 3 days, and she announced that, and she started crying, and I got up, and I'm, go talk to her, you're supposed to, no, I don't want to, go talk to her, you're supposed to, no, I don't want to, I don't know what I'll say. And thank goodness, this guy comes up and starts talking to her, and even from halfway across the room, I can see he is way close in her personal space, and I can see her doing this. And he's inviting her out to coffee, and he wants to talk to her about sobriety. And I get up, and I walk up to her, and I actually, so proud of myself, I inserted my left shoulder in between them, and I said, hey, Bill and Joe are over there. Why don't you go talk to them? I'll talk to her from now on. And I probably wasn't very graceful about it. I don't know. I was 5 months sober. But that was the first woman I sponsored. I didn't sponsor her for very long. She didn't stay sober, but it sure helped me a lot. I mean, I really am at my best when I'm working with another person. I mean, I feel the sense of belonging, the sense of comfort, and not because everything's hunky-dory and rosy. I feel it because I realize I am the same as, and God is blessing me, and He's right there with me, and I'm going to stumble, I'm going to fall, I'm going to get hurt. I'll probably punch some pillows and cry some more. But God's got me. He's right there. And I want so badly for this person to experience that same experience, that no matter how difficult life gets, if I'm just willing to breathe in and breathe out for a few more seconds, this too shall pass. And I didn't think that was possible. I mean, that requires work. That requires discipline. You know, doing the same thing over and over and over again until it becomes a regular part of my life, and I do it without thinking. I don't like doing that. That is the opposite of everything I've tried to do. I was 40 years old when I got sober. I don't know if I said my sobriety date, August 26, 2002. I was 40 years old, and I had nothing, all these accomplishments, none of them were particularly honest. None of them involved a lot of work. They were, you know, if I wasn't naturally good at it, I didn't go with it. If it required repetition, I didn't do it. That just was not in Lynn's playbook for life. I'd watch you and applaud you while you did it and see if I can ingratiate myself with you so maybe some of it would rub off on me. You know, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. That is absolutely unfamiliar territory to me. And I'm 40 years old, and I'm thinking, my God, I sound like a kindergartner. I have got the discipline of a 4-year-old. As strange as it may seem, even I don't know how to just get down in the trenches and do what I'm supposed to do and wait to see what the rewards are. And I have over and over again myself and watched my friends, acquaintances, women I sponsor, have a choice between I want it now, I'm going to do it, it'll make me happy this week and maybe next week, versus no, I won't, on the chance that there really is a spiritual principle involved, and that spiritual principle is diligence or patience or whatever, and I will not feel good today. I will squirm for the next couple of days, and I'll see if 6 months from now I'm happier. And that's like one of the 100% that hasn't failed yet. I wish I could do it 100% of the time, but it really hasn't failed yet. I have gotten to see my family, this strange little family that was started by two 16-year-olds who didn't know how and didn't particularly want to be married and had kids despite themselves and ended up exploding all over us. I've gotten to see my family be noble and be loving, and I've learned how to love people that maybe don't like each other. My father, I had to be the one that called my father and told him that my brother had died. And I remember, it was after home group, I remember sitting in home group that night. They had just told me what had happened, and I'm sitting there, and Chuck's across the circle, and a guy who I knew was an EMS was sitting next to him, and I remember asking him how many pints of body does the human body hold, because they told me how much blood he'd lost in the hospital. And I went to home group, because I didn't know what else to do. I could have driven to Greenville from Rocky Mount and gone insane on the way, been there, maybe not been supportive to my mother, I don't know. Or I could have stayed in my home group, focused on the solution, focused on staying sober through this next, because this page was, I could feel the page in my life turning. And I got the news when I got home, and I called my father, and I remember hearing this exhale come out of his body. And 2 days later, I was on my way up to Virginia, and my dad died a couple years later. His heart just gave out. And at my brother's funeral, his wife drank herself to death 6 months after my father did. So that's 2006, 2010, into 2009, halfway through 2010. Each time, so I know it wasn't an aberration, I've gotten to see this group of people who are united by blood and memories, not necessarily kinship or liking, come together and be noble. And I've gotten to be noble with them. I've gotten to be appropriate. I've gotten to be kind and loving. They've taught me so much, and it's only because you guys have shared that example with me. I didn't know this was what my home group was feeding me. But for the most part, I have been a part of experiences where for the first time in my life, I have gotten to experience people interacting with each other in a better way than I've ever experienced people interacting. I've gotten socialized in my home group. I've made a disastrous home group choice, experience that I paid for later, but I've gotten to see other people in my home group rise to the occasion and hold me and explain things to me and not let me go even as they're kind of laughing at me, hoping maybe I'll just laugh at myself just once so I can move past it. I moved from Rocky Mount to Raleigh in 2006. It was time. It's past time. My daughter, when I told her I was moving home, she exhaled, but it was a good exhale, and she said, "Mom, you told me in March of 2002 that you were leaving for an 8-day evaluation. I have been waiting for you to come home since 2002. And my old home group packed me up. I hit the 64 in a thunderstorm with lightning, and everything I owned was in a 16-foot U-Haul, and that U-Haul was waving and tottering. And Jim H., who now lives in Meridian, Mississippi, I know he's been here many times, he had told me, because I drove into Raleigh every Thursday. It was my day off, and I would call my children for 3 years. I would call them and say, "Hi, it's Mom." Chirpy, happy voice. "I'm coming into town. I hope I get to see you today. Let me know what you're doing if you want to meet for lunch or whatever. I love you." And that was it. And there were many Thursdays that I sat in some bookstore or some coffee shop. No, I didn't have money. It would have been mostly the bookstore because I could read books for free for hours and hours. And I would go to what's now my home group at 7 o'clock. And so I got to know some of them people really well. And Jim told me, he said, "Let me know when you leave, and I'll get you unpacked." And so I called him in the middle of a lightning storm on 64 and said, "I'm whatever minutes out." He said, "We'll be there." And I pulled up to my new apartment, and I got to see Jim and Randy and some other guys I didn't know get out of a truck, and they let my mother tell them how to unpack and where to put my furniture, and smiled and were gracious and kind, and they had me unpack. I mean, it's like principals had me at hello. Had me at hello. I go to my home group every Tuesday or Thursday night. I think after, 11 years and 10 months or 11 months, I probably can still count on 2 hands. I hope I'm not exaggerating, but the number of times I've missed it. They are my people. They are my family. When we argue and we don't break any bonds, when we argue and act badly or not, I get to take that experience out into the regular world. I mean, I have learned everything I need to know about how to successfully live life in society from my home group. It is my place to go. It is where I can walk in and be spinning and walk out, and I am guaranteed that at least, if not all, those voices have shut down for a little while. We share the solution. We share what we did to stay sober, how we developed our relationship with God. I sponsor women. I just rotated out of being DCM of District 31. I wasn't going to do that because it looked like it involved a lot of work. I discovered that GSR meant I had to remember and write stuff down and not just wait till the last minute. Tried that for a while, didn't work so much. And actually understand the stuff that I was relaying from the district and the area assemblies to my home group, so that maybe, my God, if they asked me a question, I could not make up an answer, because that just doesn't sit well with me in AA. And then Jim, right before he moved to Meridian, Mississippi, said, so what you going to do now that you're rotating out? So I don't know. He said, I think you ought to check out being a DCM. I said, Jim, they have to do a lot of stuff. He said, oh, no, you can do it. Let me know. I'm moving, but let me know how that works for you. Let me know how that goes. And sure enough, we invited him back to speak about 6 months later, and they were getting ready to have the elections, and I wasn't going to say a thing to him about it. And he said, so you going to that district meeting next month and stand for alternate DCM? I mean, left to my own devices, I would go home and read a really good book and maybe talk to one person on the phone, maybe think about what color I'm going to repaint a room in the house. I might go shopping, spend a little time with God. Left to my own devices, I would dig that ditch, and I would decorate that ditch, and I'd hang pictures, and I'd put nice rugs down, and I would slowly, little by little, get angrier and angrier, because my world would start just sinking in. And you guys don't let me do that. You give me that nudge I need. You keep me involved in other people. You keep God in my life. I mean, I think every person in this room is a little doorway through which God can reach me and can speak to me. He's yet to leave that note on my pillow. You know, he's yet to be a loud, thunderous voice in my head. But what happens is I have people who come up and he'll say something to me, and it'll mean something. I don't know if you have any idea what it means, but it'll mean something to me. And I'm a part of the world today. As long as I keep doing this, all those voices are at bay. AA has grown me up. It's given me a purpose. I am enough. Most days, if I've prayed, if I spent a day, and as I go about my business in prayerful contemplation with God, or at least an active, disciplined awareness of God, because I can stop doing it. I can think it ought to just start coming to me. It is a discipline to be consciously aware of God. It requires some work, some days more so than others. But I find that, I have enough. In every area of my life, I have enough. And not only do I have enough, what's more important is that I am enough. Whether it's this big or not, I am enough. And it's just my job to do the best with what I've got. And you guys taught me that. And through that, I will stay sober. I hope. I want to thank you for your attention. It seems like a little warm in here. Usually when the heat wave kicks in, I know it's about time to stop. I can't see the clock. Oh, it's about 3 till. Perfect. So thank you very much. Thank you for my life.